I'm going to introduce Precious as my co-host. All right, I'm gonna let a few more folks come in, and then we're gonna get started. For those of you that don't know, my name is Ashley Walker. I am president and founder of Black In Astro and creator of Black Space Week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Here is my co-host and our Madam Secretary, Precious. She is also here with us to also answer some of your favorite cat questions. I don't know if the ladies will be able to answer that. However, she is here. Thank you all so much for being here with us at the current moment, especially during this time where we are trying to figure out so much media literacy that's going on in the world. And there's so much misconception. So I'm really, really grateful that you all came here and joined us today. So while we're getting started, I'm going to go ahead and go from my screen from who I see first, and you can introduce yourself. Go ahead, Brittany.
Hi, everyone. I am so honored and delighted to be here with you today. My name is Brittany Brown. I am residing and working in the Washington, D.C. area. I mostly have experience in communications, working for government agencies, and my current job is leading digital communications at NASA. So thank you again for having me for this panel.
Of course. Dr. Katrina Miller.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Miller. I'm a reporter on the science desk of the New York Times. What else? I graduated with my PhD in physics in 2023 from the University of Chicago. I studied neutrinos, and then I did a year-long fellowship, and I got hired on after, so I've been here.
And last but not least, Chandelize.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chandelize Duster. I am a journalist and a reporter. I've done work at CNN. I've done work at NBC News as a reporter. I'm currently a contributing senior correspondent for The Emancipator, which is a wonderful news magazine covering all things race. Would love to have you there. And also, I report for NPR. I've just recently, within the past year or so, been covering space and science, but I've always been interested in space and science. What else is there out about me? Oh, I'm born and raised from Alabama, Florence, Alabama, not far from where the Space and Rocket Center is, Marshall Space Flight Center as well. And I am also the author of my newsletter called The C Note that comes out every week. And I am also a advocate for endometriosis awareness, and I have a support group called Virginia Hope, and I am a founding member of the Worldwide Endomarch organization, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you all so very much. And so again, for those that may not know, they're just coming in. This is my co-host, Precious. She will be helping us. You may hear her meows, but she's definitely asking really important questions. She is also on the Black In Astro e-board as our Madam Secretary. So to get started, can you ladies tell us a little bit about yourself? Let's start with you, Chandelize.
Yeah, so, I kind of went into a little bit about myself, but, I am a journalist and I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area as well. And, I cover, pretty much a range of things. I've covered politics, I cover race, I can cover pretty much anything. But one of the things that I really love to cover when I have time to sink my teeth into it is I really love to cover things that are space related and science related. I was actually, interested in astronomy growing up in, when I was in high school. And so I love reading some of the work by Dr. Miller, who I says all things awesome in this space. So that's just a little bit about me. I don't want to go get ahead of myself, but yeah, that's just a little bit about, what I do. And I ask questions for a living and I get paid for it. So it's a wonderful thing to do.
A little bit more about your background, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, let me think what I didn't say. I was raised in Arizona, lived there until I was 17, went to college at Duke, majored in physics, went straight into a PhD program in Chicago, where I'm still based. I think somewhere along the way, I realized that I didn't like doing research. And so, I started looking for other opportunities. I started sort of connecting with, some old hobbies and passions that I had, including writing, that I sort of had put on a shelf while I was in college, and eventually found my way to the intersection of writing about science, which made me feel like my PhD wasn't entirely a waste of time. So I was sort of moonlighting as a freelancer for the final 2 years of my PhD, which I don't recommend. It was a lot. But I did an internship over one summer at Wired Magazine, and that's what sort of got my name on the map in the journalism space. That's also, I think, the first time that I really understood the distinction between science writing and science journalism and, the broader science communication umbrella and how those things fit in with each other. And then it was just, I wanted to keep my name relevant. So I was freelancing for a lot of different like science outlets, Symmetry Magazine, Scientific American. I was also doing a lot of like personal writing on the side, just to keep that muscle fresh, I guess. And then I graduated. I think I defended April 2023, and I started at the Times June 2023. So it was about 2 months later. Um, and I always have a difficult time sort of summarizing the beats that I cover. I usually just say, like space, including cosmology and space exploration, physics, some parts of physics, some physics I'm not I'm not as excited about, but particle physics especially because that's my bread and butter. And then also, I'm really keen on stories that exist at the intersection of science and society, and I can go into that in more detail if anyone's interested.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I remember the day you graduated. So I can actually tell you when, the time, the day, because I was sitting there taking an exam while this girl was getting her PhD, doing her PhD defense. But at the same time, I was there. And so it was such an honor to watch Katrina grow from when I first met her in 2017 to now. So we've been friends for almost 10 years. So it's just been a journey of watching her. Next up is Miss Brittany Brown, who I met in 2020.
Yeah, so to tell you, I guess, a little bit more about my background, especially as it relates to comms, it has been, I would say in one word, just unconventional and unplanned. I really stumbled into communications. It's not something that I sought out. And it really started when I was an undergrad at the University of Virginia. And again, just as an undergrad student, looking to make some money, I was looking for a job. And I ended up getting a part-time job in the University Relations Department, which now is known as the Public Affairs Department. And so I worked there for several years doing things like transcribing speeches, updating their website, writing things for their newsletter. And it was then that I was like, okay, I can do this. Like I was learning on the job. And essentially that led to other internships in communications. And from there, I have worked for both small scale and large scale organizations, both in public affairs as well as in marketing. I've worked at NPR in their marketing department, leading social media. I've worked at the Pentagon, leading their social media. But all of it really was by happenstance of being in the right place at the right time, showing up my best self, being true to myself, and then just, flexing my creativity and my talents. So, again, my degree is not in communications, but I've had a lot of on the job training that each role set me up for the next role. And over time, I've just learned so much. One thing that I will note as I talk about or just think about my work trajectory, my first, I would say, big girl job, I was working in a office of communications, and I was doing a little bit of everything. I was doing media relations, community relations, website, and my boss pulled me to the side because I was super young and said, "Hey, I want you to figure out this social media thing." This was like 2007. People were using MySpace, and like it was again a long time ago. Um, And at that point, I went from being a generalist to really being a specialist in social media, and it pigeonholed me into social media, which again landed me a job at the Pentagon because I came really good at it. I like immersed myself in and I learned it. But after a couple years at the Pentagon, I said, okay, listen, think about your long-term career goals. Do you want to be doing social media forever? Is social media going to be around in 10 years? And that's when I sought out the opportunity to, all right, I need to pivot. And that's when I pivoted to marketing, sought out a role at NPR. And so as it relates to communications, I mean, there's different pathways to get you to where you want to be, different specialties that, you know, if you're interested in or you're passionate about. But my rule of thumb to everyone is, again, don't pigeonhole yourself into one particular area, that you need to be adaptable, you need to be open, you need to be teachable as well. And all of those things that I've learned over time really set me up for success in my career in communications.
Thank you so much for that. I think that those words were so true, especially someone who is currently on the job market right now, which I am like, oh my goodness, okay, we're doing this thing, right? Where you have to have this certain set of skills that you're only trained on. But if you're more flexible to doing, you know, a lot of different things, it can help you in as what you really want to do. Like Katrina said, she wasn't passionate about doing like, okay, being in a lab, yada, yada, yada. But writing was her thing, right? And so I think that that's really, really important for folks to just hear and realize, especially during these times where a lot of jobs are like on pause, and we're gonna get into more media stuff later. Um, Now, this goes for anyone. Can you describe for me and for the rest of the folks at home watching, what is your typical schedule, your duties? What does that look like for you? Anyone can start.
I can start. I think it's very difficult to define a typical day for a journalist. Every day really looks different. It's some combination of talking to sources, finding sources, fact checking, you know, like going through your interview notes, trying to, you know, ideate, shape a story, writing, editing, you know, answering emails. I could spend all day answering emails. I used to joke that when I was in academia, it was impossible to stay up on emails, and I'm very humbled by the amount of emails I now receive as a journalist. Um, but yeah, I think I really liked I can't remember who said it, but like you ask questions for a living and you get paid to do it, right? And I really like that summary of like my job description as well. Like I feel very grateful to be in a position that allows me to explore my curiosity. And the way that I do that from day to day, whether that's traveling to a new place, you know, talking to someone new, or, you know, writing a story in my head and then rushing to get back to my computer to get it on paper, I think varies from day to day.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Miller. I mean, as journalists, your day is never going to look the same. It just depends on what it is, and especially depending on what you cover. So for me, you know, I also spend my day, you know, trying to talk to sources, you know, fact checking, doing research, thinking about, you know, what else is out there that is probably going to land on my plate. And sometimes your day is not a 9 to 5. Sometimes your day is a 4 a.m. to a 12 a.m. the very next day. It just depends on what it is. And I know, you know, particularly if it's a launch or something that NPR has assigned me to help watch and write and report. Space launches, it depends on what time they happen. You know, if it's early in the morning or if it's late at night, if there's a rocket launch. So, you know, that may mean me sitting up and, you know, watching NASA TV or maybe a SpaceX feed to you know, to kind of monitor that and, you know, be thinking ahead. And sometimes you're pre-writing, right? You do some pre-writing, you know, what could possibly happen? You know, what can you expect? What does that mean? Shaping your story. And I think the other part of, you know, my day is Also thinking about when I'm going to eat, because sometimes as journalists, we get so busy into the work, we don't think about, oh crap, it's 4 o'clock. I haven't ate. So, it's that self-care part of it too. And so as much as I'm a person, I like to get a certain amount of sleep. I have to get at least between 6 and 8 hours of sleep. And, it just doesn't happen like that. And I have to navigate that. That may mean doing more Starbucks that week than normal. And in the weekend, depending on what it is, right? I have a newsletter. I have the C note. It comes out on Mondays. So even when I'm done everything throughout the week, that weekend I'm thinking about, okay, what am I going to put in my newsletter? What am I going to report? What is coming that week? So for me, it seems like I'm always constantly working, which is not a good thing. So if you're interested in becoming a journalist, just keep in mind that if you expect to have a 9 to 5, you're not going to have a 9 to 5. You're just not, especially in this day and age. So
Yes, you are so on point with that of like, again, the hours can be ridiculous. And I love, love, love that you mentioned self-care. People, talk about that a lot, but I will say that, as I've extended in my career and I've become a leader, for me, it's not just about talking the talk, but it's about walking the walk. And so when I talk about mindfulness with my team, I know that there are days where I'm triple booked 1 hour for a meeting. Like, how am I going to be three different places at one time? It's so many meetings, so many emails, so much happening on a typical day. But I intentionally set aside time for what I call a digital brain break, where I put 15 minutes on the calendar for my entire team. It's optional, but I'm like, you join this Teams event, and I share my screen. I'll play some jazz music, something really relaxing, like videos that I've seen on YouTube, whether it's from an aquarium, just watching, again, their live feeds. But I want to show them and not just tell them that while the work we do is important, some of this work can wait. You need to make sure you're taking your breaks for lunch. You're taking your bathroom breaks. It's just, again, saying it is one thing, but we also have to make sure that we're doing it. So for me, a typical day is crazy from the start, whether it's 8 a.m. or if it's 2 a.m. because we have a lunch. It's a blend of, strategy and hands-on execution. And so, if something has gone viral on social media, I may be called into a meeting like, how are we going to address this? What are you seeing on social, Brittany? The things that we know about, and then some of the unknowns that come up. So it's a matter of me connecting with my entire team, because I have so many different verticals under me. So I'm in charge of our website, our social media, our live programming, our podcast, photography, so on and so on. But making sure we're all aligned. There's a lot happening on any given day, but making sure that we have a well-oiled machine so that everyone knows their role. We come together as a team, but again, we take care of each other, and it's not just lip service, as we are so busy, not only with our professional lives, but our personal lives, and balancing all that together.
That is well said. And I'm so happy y'all brought that up, because I really pray for y'all, especially in this political climate, um, which has been very, very interesting to say the least. And so while it's been very interesting, and, again, we want to remind the audience, self-care is important. Do what you must. Please relax. Take your time. I definitely need to hear these words because, again, it's a lot going on. However, I think this is really, really important, and also this helps us like segue into our next question, which is, how do you define media literacy in the context of your work as a journalist or communication specialist, especially in today's landscape? Anyone can go.
You might have to pick on somebody because I'll go first every time. Like,
And I'm trying not to hold the conversation because I can ramble forever. So
you go first because you went last time. So
okay, all right. So for me, I think, media literacy right now in this environment where you have all these bots and deep fakes and AI, it's really about having the ability to suss out what's real and what's not. And I'll say that I'm an older millennial, so I think about my formative years when we had a book report. we had to go use encyclopedias. We had to have primary and secondary sources. So you got those skills of knowing how to research. So as it relates to media literacy right now, I understand for other generations, and as people are consuming so much info online, how it may be hard for them. Yes, the encyclopedias, okay? Yes, before Wikipedia was a thing. And by the way, when Wikipedia came online, they told us, no, that is not a legitimate source. So I'm showing my age here. But anyway, um, so, again, for younger generations, I'm aging myself here, but, they didn't have that same experience. So I can relate and understand and be empathetic of, like, for them, it may be a little bit challenging. If you see something on social media, see it online, it seems like it's legit. But I think that as communicators, it's important for us with our respective audiences to make sure that we're educating them on the real places to go to get information, because everybody's a content creator right now. Everybody has a microphone and has a voice and can get things out. But I think as an individual, it's about challenging yourself, not just to look at something, see something and run with it, but to say, okay, let me go Google this image. Let me do a reverse Google image search. Is this showing up anywhere else? Is this like that meme format with those big white and black letters? Like, is this from a legitimate source? And so media literacy right now is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And so, again, as it relates to my role, that's why when I see things that are misinformation, I work my best to make sure that I'm refuting that with the correct information and pointing them to a source, what I would call back in the day that encyclopedia, but a legitimate source that actually has the real information.
Yeah, I totally agree with that 1000%. I mean, media literacy, for us as journalists, it encompasses all of that, especially when there's a lot of things that we see on social media because, a lot of people are on social media. And so sometimes before you can get someone on the phone, you may see something on social media. So for me, I'm always thinking, wait, is this real? Is this true? You even have some lawmakers that are sharing things that are AI generated that just aren't true. So that's me as a journalist, having to take that extra step of, okay, where did this come from? Is this something actually the first, right? Because you'll hear stuff come out all the time for the first time ever, this and this and this. So I'll give an example. There was something that came out about the National Weather Service in Alaska, issuing a heat advisory. And people were saying, oh, this is the first time this has ever been done. Well, me as a journalist, I'm thinking, wait, is this really? Who's saying this? How would they know this? So that's picking up the phone, talking to the National Weather Service. Then there's a you find out there's a caveat to that. Yes, the first time because they never had that, they weren't able to do that, and they weren't able to categorize it like that. So it's just we have to, as journalists, because people look to us, at a point in time, journalists weren't as questioned as we are now. We weren't being called fake news and all of that, a while back. We have to be very, very careful to make sure that we are fact checking the fact checking and really extra verifying sources so that we can continue to have the trust from people. And I too remember the days when Wikipedia was not able to be sourced in a paper. I remember using my Encarta, taking this all the way back, Encarta encyclopedias and all these other things, to write a paper because that's all we had. But now it's everything and anybody can create something and people look at that and they think that that's Bible and you can get in trouble like that.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for saying that. Because let me tell you, I'm sorry, Katrina.
No, you good. You good.
They've been saying that Howard University is this the first time an HBCU has like gotten R1 status, and I know everybody has saw that. That is actually incorrect. We had it in 1987 and up until 2005. So I'm so happy you said that because there are so many different things that we see, especially as me as a science communicator, that we see we repost. I remember something Katrina got on me about this a few years back, where it was something from the New York Post, and I knew better because it was from the Post, and it was something with like neutrinos. I think you remember it was like neutrinos or something with CERN or something like that that was happening, and I reposted it like, yeah, because it sounded so legit. And then Katrina was like, Ashley, now why'd you do that? I'm gonna go ahead and let Katrina go.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to these really great responses that I think media literacy is critique, right? Like it's the ability to critique. And you learn how to critique in a variety of spaces, whether you're coming from a science background, you're coming from a humanities background, critique in the sense of like having a healthy skepticism. And this is something that, again, like if you are trained as a scientist, like you have a healthy skepticism for your initial hypothesis, right? I've definitely honed that a lot more, like that, honing that skill in graduate school really set me up for understanding how to use that in journalism. Because as a journalist, obviously, like was already said, you have to question everything. You have to question, what is this person that you're talking to? What is their goal? If you're reading something, an article or something, who is the audience? What is the goal of this story? And I think that this is true not only for the non-science public, but also for scientists, right? Like my sources. Like I think media literacy also means understanding how journalism works and how journalism, public facing journalism, is different from the communications office at your university or at the institution that you're working on, that you're working with. In the sense of like what is the goal of this story, what is attempted to be told, and who is the audience, because all of those questions are very different depending on where this information is coming from.
Thank you all so much. As you all can see, our co-host Precious has returned. She did have some questions, but I'm going to go ahead and ask one of them for her, which is what specific skills do you consider essential to be media literate? And what criteria do you use to evaluate the credibility and real and to be reliable sources of information?
I will go ahead and start since everyone else has gone first. I will say, one of the key skills is being able to discern, as I call it. You have to be able to sit and think about what is this information? Where is it coming from? What is the intent? And that's something that, my wonderful co-panelists have also mentioned. I think questioning that, I think some people may be irritated by saying, well, why do you have to question everything? And it's not necessarily because you're skeptical of everything. I think viewing that as when you're asking questions you're seeking to understand. And by you asking questions, that allows you to have a more informed opinion or thought about whatever it is that you are questioning, right? Like, I think being able to discern whether something is real and balancing that between what you believe is also a skill, because as journalists, we always have this thing about our biases, and everybody has a quote bias depending on where you're from or that sort of thing. And in journalism, we are taught to see things objectively. And so, this is probably a bad example, but I'm a huge Alabama football fan. I was born and raised in Alabama, roll tide. And if Alabama is playing Auburn during the Iron Bowl, which is a very hot, heavily heated football game of the entire college football season, if for some reason, an Auburn football player, ends up getting a touchdown, and I see, that they, had a foul on the play and it wasn't called by the ref, my point of view is going to be, well, nah, he shouldn't have been able to get that. That shouldn't count. But then objectively, I would have to think, well, what went wrong here? Like, I have to get outside of my personal feelings about it. So I think, for us as journalists, we have to, it's tricky, but I can't bring my personal feelings into everything. I have to sit there and really think about what the information is, why is it coming to me? Who is it coming from? What is the motive? What is the goal? How can I relate that to my audience? So that's why I will say it's probably one of the most important parts of that is being able to discern.
I love everything that you mentioned. And I'll just add another thing that I think is an important skill is, verifying those sources. Like, and I keep going back to that encyclopedia example in my mind because it was just so ingrained in me. And like, again, verifying sources and figuring out how to fact check. And another one that comes to mind for me when you're thinking of media literacy, trying to figure out is there bias. I think about when um, there was this article, everyone may have seen it because it kind of went viral, that the Vulture put out about Sinners, and their headline about Sinners really got the Black community online enraged, right? So when you see something like that, you're just like, okay, hold up. How does this headline compare to other headlines for other similar movies? Or, hey, let me click on that author's name to see what else they have authored and penned in the past. And so again, thinking through those things of one, who was the source? How credible are they? What is their, portfolio look like? I click on their name on their website for the news outlet. Like if they only have written one or two things, it's like, all right, how does that compare to, their stance, that they're having? Is this someone who's trying to make a name for themselves, as an example? And really sensationalizing headlines. So again, that source verification and fact checking are the skills that I think are the most important as it relates to media literacy. And again, you don't have to be a communication specialist or a journalist to do that. That should just be, something everyone wants to do to make sure you're not sharing bad information. Like, you don't want someone to call you a liar or say that, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. And so, it's something in it for everyone to really realize when you are repeating stuff or you're sharing stuff that it is actually true and has been fact checked, it has been verified, and it's from a credible source, and not some just run of the mill, rumor mill. I think I heard, or maybe this is happening. This is gossip versus this is the real deal. Holyfield, what is happening?
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that quickly. Like I kind of already said this, like have a healthy dose of skepticism, ask a lot of questions. I think specifically when it comes to reporting in the realms of like space and physics, this is like one of the areas that my educational background comes into play when it comes to evaluating the credibility of information, right? Because I was, raised as a scientist, if you will. I have a intimate sense not only of the scientific background that I'm often reporting on, but also how science works, right? Because I've engaged in the scientific process, and I can expand upon this more if anyone is interested. But I think that there is like always, I often come across a misconception in the ways that my scientific background is useful for the work that I do now. And that is one of like the ways that I think that people maybe don't necessarily expect. Yes, I think I'll leave it there.
You can elaborate more if you want.
Yeah, so I think a lot of scientists especially have the impression that I am sort of writing from my own expertise, right? Like I see something, I'm reading a paper about a new result, and then I'm like, oh, using what I learned in graduate school to write about this. And that's not really the role of a journalist, whether you have a PhD or not. The role of a journalist is to sort of act as a liaison between the experts, the quote unquote experts who are like the PhD scientists who are writing this paper or whatever, and the public. And so I'm acting as a third party observer. And, even to Sean Elisa's point about biases, like having a PhD is in a sense a bias, right? Because I have a different lens of information and how to evaluate that information than others. And so that's something that I'm often putting on a shelf when I am approaching stories instead of using that expertise to sort of like guide or shape the story, if that makes sense. And that's not to say that it doesn't come into play in terms of like the angles that I find most interesting about stories or the questions that I ask, but it's not me writing from my own opinion based on my expertise. It is me relaying the expertise of other experts in the field from a third party, quote unquote, objective position.
Thank you for expanding on that because I really want to hear like how you felt, because oftentimes when we talk to journalists or when we talk to folks like Brittany, who are behind the scenes of government entities doing this work, and being a communication specialist, we don't hear what you all actually are saying, which is why we want to bring this panel in the age of media literacy. For context, this year, Black Space Week is, I joke with the whole entire team when I say the category is literacy, and everybody's like, no, for real. And so we are doing something with reading at the end of the week. So we hope you all join us there. To continue your point, what strategies do you use for fact checking, even though we went over this, but for fact checking, verifying information? How do you identify and mitigate bias in media content? We can start with Brittany.
So for me, when I think about bias in media coverage, I will look at the history of the organization. You know, a lot of this, I think I learned and I appreciate it from my experience working at NPR here in DC. And so much respect and gratitude for the newsroom of seeing how they work, of how people want it to be objective, how they left that bias at the door. And content was not published until they really had it right. And knowing that, hey, you know what, I'm going to sit on this, or I need more sources before I can report on this. So, you know, I think as it relates to that bias as an individual, it's about taking the time to figure out your emotional reaction as you are coming across content. Like, how does that sit with you? Like, does this seem like it's exaggerated? Does this seem like it's not realistic? And using that to inform how you scrutinize the content, and then look for other sources who may have similar content on that particular subject or topic. For me, you know, I would not say that any particular one outlet is my source of truth. You know, I like to look at different viewpoints on this. How did this outlet versus this outlet cover it? To figure out, like, okay, they're completely different, there is some bias here. And why does this one take this kind of slant versus this kind of slant? Even looking at who they interview, right? Are they interviewing only people with a certain stature? Are they, you know, again, what voices and faces are they amplifying and showcasing? All of that bias, I think with enough time and due diligence, it comes through. It may not come through for that outlet or journalist, but again, if you are looking at things with a critical eye as a consumer of media, you can over time see that there are themes and some of that bias as it comes through.
Yeah, I think the way that and again, I always bring it back to my training as a scientist just because I spent so long in academia, but I don't necessarily think that bias is inherently a bad thing, right? Like it's just a thing. Like it's a thing. I think it only becomes negative when you are not aware of it. And so that means asking questions, you know, like I personally, and I know that all journalists sort of think about this differently, but I'm of the mind, like I'm of the framework that like bias is everywhere, right? So I think it's more about like making that clear and like being transparent to the public about what those biases are. Some biases are positive, right? Like I said, I have a PhD in physics. So when I'm reporting on a particle physics story, there is a bias there because I have inside knowledge about how these analyses work that I will never be able to fully turn off. But that is a bias that ends up being like viewed very positively by the public, right? Like New York Times readers love reading a story about particle physics from a particle physicist, a particle physics trained journalist, right? And so I think it's just important to be aware of those biases, how those biases shape coverage, like Brittany said, which, you know, and then also I think in terms of like mitigating negative bias, it's very important to have others read your work. and critique your work, whether that's in reporting or other forms of writing.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has just said. In terms of the strategies I use for fact checking and verifying information, again, like I said, questioning everything. Who is saying this? Why are you saying this to me? What is the motive behind this? Who is the audience for this? Um, really thinking about, is this something that, what is the nuance of this? Is there something bubbling beneath the surface of this that maybe I should also think about? In terms of identifying and mitigating bias, I would say, and I know this may sound counterintuitive, but just hear me out. I know for me as a journalist, because I've covered a lot of things, whether it's politics, whether it's science, whether it's space, whether it's race, um, if there's something that I'm biased about, or if I have a conflict of interest, I will say, hey, I can't cover this. And one of the most recent examples of this in particular was when former President Biden announced his last list of pardons. My line sister, Kimba Smith Pradia, got a full pardon. NPR asked me to write it. I said, hey, this is my line sister. I know her personally. I can't write this. Would love to have my name on it, but I can't cover that. Right. And that's something that I knew I objectively, because I know her and I had just talked to her on the phone and I was in tears and emotional about it. I can't do this story. But also on the flip side of that, I just did a personal essay for the Emancipator, talking about my experience with endometriosis. And it's public, everybody's out there, you can Google it and read it. And I wrote it from a viewpoint of my personal experience. So yes, there's a bias there, but to balance that bias, I went and added reporting into my analysis from scholars who were pertaining to that specific topic. Not something that I would have thought about, but what somebody else was thinking about and who studied this. So some of the ways that I mitigate bias is, and I've gotten this complaint, is a positive complaint from my editors, is I over report. So, some journalists think in a story, oh, to balance this out, you just need one voice from this side and one voice from that side. I kind of disagree. I know that we're on a time crunch, and when it's breaking news, you got to be fast. I try to get at least two or three from different sides. I may not use that reporting. Just because I don't put it in my story doesn't mean that I'm not considering what that person told me. And I talk to people that I otherwise probably would have never thought about talking to. And so and this last point that I'll give as an advice on, how to also mitigate biases, to really be intentional and think about who you're talking to for a story. Especially, like I think, for an example, covering space, and astronomy, like there's so many different layers to that. Some people, some journalists, when we're in a time crunch, you'll just go talk to anybody who studies astronomy. Well, to also help you mitigate bias, think about not just the person who studies astronomy. If you're writing about black holes, go find and talk to somebody who actually studies that, versus you just going to talk to somebody who works at a planetarium who doesn't really know about that. Because, and then also too, that will call, you can miss a lot of things if you do that. And just really just being careful and thinking about, and like was said, the person, they may have a bias. They may give you an informed opinion about something pertaining to a story because they may not like a certain study. If you're trying to get another example, get another opinion on a study that's coming out, they may not like that scientist. So there's a bias there. And so to mitigate that, you talk to somebody else who is not familiar with that study, did not participate in that study, hasn't even known about it. And they'll be like, well, they'll say, oh, well, I haven't been involved with this, but from my experience, I've seen XXX. And so those are kind of some strategies that I use when it comes to mitigating bias.
Thank you for that. I think that was very important what all of you all said. I'm really happy that, first of all, for Chandelize, thank you so much for being an Indo warrior. We appreciate you so much, and thank you for being out here for those of us who have similar struggles. We really appreciate your work and everything that you do when it comes to awareness. So, nextly, we want to go to what ways does Blackness and Black culture impact the work that you do, especially in this political climate? And I'm going to start with Chantalise because I saw her face.
I will say, I cover, race, right? When I was at CNN, before, I was unfortunately laid off in 2023. No, I'm sorry. It's 2025. 2024. I'm sorry. Time. I was covering race and equality. And working at a CNN and covering race in this day and age, you got like not one, but two targets on your back. And I was always getting the threats. I was always getting the DMs, the emails, and even though I'm gone and I still, cover race, particularly for the Emancipator or just on my own, I get threats, and a lot of people don't like that. And I was recently blamed for the rise in white supremacy. Just that sort of thing. But I don't allow those things to deter me. I have to stand in my truth that not only am I a journalist and I handle all of my stories with care and, I do the best that I can and I'm really passionate about the work and, I've gone to school and I have, my master's degree in journalism from American University and, my degree in journalism from Virginia Commonwealth University. I know that I'm also a Black woman. I was a Black woman first. And there are certain experiences and things that I've had, and I've had to navigate life with a certain pair of lenses that other people have not. And something that was eloquently said by Christiane Amanpour that she says all the time is be truthful, not neutral. There's certain things that you just can't be neutral on as a journalist. And with me being a Black journalist, when it comes to race and racism, I'm never going to be neutral. It is what it is. And this day and age where you have a administration who is doing aggressive policies that are targeting people of color, um, I don't shrink from that. And I'm not throwing any news organizations' names out there. It's just what it is. You do see Black journalists who are kind of being muzzled in ways they cover race, how they cover race, and how far they go with it. And that was even before any of this was happening. You would always see a lot of racially charged comments. Well, what does racially charged mean? Either it's racist or it's discriminatory. What is racially charged? Like that, like trying to kind of not call it what it is without calling it what it is. So in this age where we're seeing a lot of this and in policies and actions being, coming down with, DEI and all of this stuff, I'm just doing the best that I can. And it has made me decide to be more steadfast in what I'm reporting and even elevating more voices, in these spaces, especially when it comes to space and science. I would always come to you, Ashley, and be like, hey, I have an opportunity in this space. I'm covering this space related thing. Is there a Black astronomer or somebody who studies this that I can talk to? Because we are out there. And so this, me being Black, me and my unapologetically Blackness, I feel empowered to elevate more voices in science and space from people who look like us. And I feel like I have more autonomy to do that, now, at the different places I work and the things that I cover.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. And I feel everything that you just mentioned. And, you know, as that question came across, I was thinking, how will I respond to this? And I was going where you're going, that I show up every day as a Black woman, sometimes the only Black person in some of these meetings. And so my Blackness is represented in what I do, my decision making, my frame of reference as I am observing things, and also as I'm reacting things, because that Blackness doesn't leave, or I don't check it in with the clerk when I cross that threshold and open and walk in the door, right? And so for me, it's about seeing things like microaggressions, or even seeing as a manager and as a leader, okay, Are the people of color being tasked differently than others? Are the expectations of them different? And so I use my experience as a Black woman to shape how I lead. Also, things that I have experienced, and knowing that I am going to have a safe place for all of my employees, including my Black employees when they show up to work. Um, you know, Blackness is something that should be celebrated. Blackness is a part of the culture. You see it everywhere you go. You see it in the lingo that's being used. People aren't calling it AAVE, but you see big brands using that on social media. And sometimes I think about, what is the racial and ethnic composition of that team that's um, posting this content, right? Is it authentic for them? We're calling it Gen Z slang, but we know it's not that. And I also realized that I don't put myself out there publicly. So someone could be saying the same thing about the organization I work for, not knowing that a Black woman leads digital comms, right? And so for me, I think Blackness is beautiful. It should be celebrated. It is, again, when we show up as our full selves, and we should not have to make huge adjustments to feel included, um, as we are, again, having a seat at the table, wherever we may work at.
So I will expand upon that just to talk a little bit about even before the political climate, because it has gotten a lot more charged. And I'm sure probably everyone here listening can imagine. But I think even before, the presidential inauguration this January, my identity, not just as a Black person, but as a woman, as a Black woman, as a scientist, someone who grew up in a low income single parent household, went to public school, all of these things really shape, like the angles that I take, the stories that I'm interested in, the people who I talk to, as it pertains to Blackness in particular. I think, oftentimes Brittany sort of touched upon this, like there's this, everyone has experienced what it's like to be the only one, like this feeling of like being the other in a room. And knowing that and like having experienced that, that means that every time I'm approaching a story, I'm thinking, like who is going unheard? Whose voices have we not heard from? And that comes from my identity. That comes from the way that I walk through the world with this identity. Cherie, who I have to shout out, she had a question in the chat. So I actually took a writing class with her, and she's low key, high key, one of my favorite writers. So hello, it's good to see you here. And we should really reconnect offline too. But had a question about like, the intersections that I found in science journalism, and something that I always gravitate towards in stories is, like let's look at this from, like I said, like a voice that has been unheard. Some examples of that are, like I did a bunch of reporting for the solar eclipse last year, and so much of the eclipse goes through reservations, went through reservation land, right? And so, like having grown up in Arizona, which I think has, the largest or second largest population of Indigenous people in the country, I'm very tuned into those spaces, right? I'm very tuned into Indigenous eclipse practices. Like I've heard about them, I was interested in them, I wanted to know more about them, and I knew that I could spin this as a science story, right? Another example, last year I published a story called The Plight of the Palestinian Scientist, right? Because I'm a scientist, and all I could think about, when everyone, with all of the violence that we were seeing, recorded and published on social media, is what must it be like to try to be a graduate student working in a lab in this space? Are there even scientists here? And if they are, how do they how do they, like build careers? How do, like, what resources, what must it be like to work in a lab where you only have a few hours of electricity, right, every day? And so that is another story idea that was very much shaped by something in my identity. And so I think, yes, like you, again, like there are some people who may say like, oh, like your celebration of Blackness or whatever is a bias that should be, like you should leave at the door. But I really think that, the importance of having a diverse newsroom and a diverse reporting pool really is because you're tapped into different networks, you're tapped into different people, and that allows you to really have a diverse set of ideas that you can report on and publish.
Thank you all so much for saying that. I love being a Black woman. I created, right? I created this Black woman led org, right? To celebrate Blackness around the world, not just African American centric, right? We have people who are from South Africa on our executive board, St. Lucia, another Caribbean woman on our that does our socials, by the way. It's a Caribbean woman that does our socials. So shout out to Cheyenne for all the graphics. And so like we have this amazing diverse pool of people that we try to pull in every single year. And when I thought about this panel, I thought, me and Caprice, we were talking about, I said, what do you think about a femme fatale? And then I brought it to the team, and the team was like, yes, 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 yes. We were trying to do at least two, but one of them did not come out as a femme fatale because a man jumped in and we were just like, ah. But we still wanted to celebrate the fact that our Blackness is our joy. And that's why we're here today, because this is one big family reunion, right? And as I've been trying to get you ladies together for months, I was just like, y'all will work together well. All three y'all work together well. And so this is a family reunion where we celebrate our Blackness, how it impacts our work, and the lens that we see everything through. So I'm so happy that you all shared that with us. With this being said, now what is the most challenging part of interfacing the public? Have you had any particular memorable interactions? And we're going to start with Katrina.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'll answer the second first. I get a lot of, so something that, for better or worse, the New York Times has decided to make all of our work addresses public in our bios now, next to, a photo of what we look like. Mine has a big old afro. It was before I cut my hair for like the third time. And also, even before that, anyone who's been on the New York Times website has probably come across the comment section, right? And so there's a lot of engagement with people who are reading my work in that I just never had when I was freelancing. It just, I would maybe get the occasional email, but like people were not going out of their way like they do now because it's so easy, it's so accessible just to contact me. And so I think that's been really memorable because I get to see a lot of positive responses to my work. I get a lot of affirmation that is so appreciated. And I am that person who, like my mom made me respond to everything with a thank you letter. So unfortunately, I feel compelled to respond to everyone. um, but I think that's also really challenging, right? I am working at a place where traditionally a lot of journalists work their way up to and, end their careers, right? So, like traditionally journalism looked like, getting a bachelor's or master's, going to work at a local, going to work at a regional paper, and then, working up to a national or international outlet like the New York Times. And I sort of like flip that on its head, right? Like I do have a PhD, but I'm also like one of the least experienced people on my desk in terms of journalism. And so that means because I have so much public interaction with the general public about my work, it when I first started, especially, it felt a lot like doing my homework and then publishing it on this huge platform for everyone to nitpick, everyone to critique, and so I think it kind of has gone both ways. Like I appreciate the position that I'm in because it gives me the opportunity to tell stories that matter to a very large platform. That inevitably means that there's always going to be someone who is not happy with the way that you said something or the punctuation that you used, or there are people who will just try to find something with your work. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I I 1000%, right? Like, and I tell young aspiring journalists, you have a First Amendment right to report, and people have a First Amendment right to not like what you report. So if you are in journalism to be popular, you are in the wrong field. Depending on what it is you want to cover, you are in the wrong field. And as I said, working at CNN, I had a big target on my back. The target never went away. I've always had my email out there, being transparent if people wanted to talk to me, because that's just what it is. And while I have had the racist emails, unfortunately, one time, uh, this person got a hold of my personal phone number, called me on a Saturday morning. All I'm gonna say is we ended up having to get law enforcement involved because this person made a threat. But I will say I have had positive things as well, that when I've written about race, right? Because it's kind of one of those things where, you write about race, again, this whole climate, people are emboldened to come at you, and they're not hiding their names. They are putting their whole name on things when they come at you. So um, there was one man when I wrote an essay about how my experience with the Confederate flag when I was young, when I was called the N word when I was 5. I wrote this for CNN a couple years ago. And there was a white man, he emailed me and he thanked me for writing that because it gave him a lot to think about. And it inspired him to reconnect with one of his childhood friends who was Black. And he said to me, you writing what you wrote really made me think about how he may have felt back then and how I should have protected him more as a white person in my power. And I'm going to reconnect with him and reach out to him and tell him that I'm sorry. And so that was something that really, really touched me. And then something that I recently had, working on a weather story. I had wrote a weather story about these severe storms and everything that was going to be coming. And I always pull the maps and the graphics from the National Weather Service, of what the forecast is going to be. And it has the codes and stuff on there, like the W with the colors and the rain and everything. And this man emailed me. He said, "Hey, thank you so much for writing this. I don't know what these letters mean on this graphic. What does that mean? My mom lives out here and I want to be able to let her know if she needs to evacuate or not, but I don't know what this means." And so for me as a journalist, I knew what it means. I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, aren't you able to see what it means? But I really sat back and I said, no, he brought up a good point. Just because I know it doesn't mean everybody else knows it. And so I talked with my editor, we changed out the graphic to make it more simplified. And I emailed him back and I said, thank you so much for raising that excellent point. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. You've given me a lot to think about going forward. I hope your mom is safe this weekend. This is what you need to know. And I've also changed the graphic. So, having those conversations with the public, I know some journalists were always taught, don't read the comments. No, it's good for you to read the comments. I mean, it will trigger you and make you feel like, some days like, oh my God. But it makes me think about, am I hitting this right? What are people thinking about? And it's okay to be accessible. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and argue with you about about some reporting with, even though I know I talk to people that you haven't picked up the phone with. Like, I'm not going to, some people just want to be combative and they're like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, did you pick up the phone and call the president's office? Did you pick up the phone and talk to this person at NASA? Like, I don't, as Sarah Seidner always said, D&E, do not engage. Don't engage with the combativeness. But I do think that being accessible and standing 10 toes down on what you reported and being able to ask authentic, genuine questions from the public about what you reported, I don't think there's anything wrong with that if it's coming from a place of curiosity and them just want to know more.
Yeah, and on my end, again, I echo everything that has been shared. I think one of the most challenging ways of interacting with the public is that comment section because it can be a dumpster fire for sure. But on the positive side, one of the things I'll say about my organization is that because we have such a large presence, some of that self-policing. And there are days where I tell my team, and I have to do it too, of like, mentally it's too much to read that negativity just day in and day out. And so I tell them, hey, if it's becoming too difficult, please just log off. I mean, we have sometimes gruesome photos from war, some things that have nothing to do with what we posted. And so that's challenging, where anybody basically has a voice and they can say anything. I'm grateful for the filters that some of the platforms, allow to automatically block out some of that, but the things that get through the filters, that definitely is challenging. The other thing I'll say that's challenging, just like as a communications professional, is really cracking the nut on how to communicate to so many different audiences at one time, because you can't assume that everybody has the same baseline knowledge about whatever topic. And so it's like, okay, what grade level do we write to? Are we using terminology like payloads and things that people have no idea what that means? And we have to take a step back and think, okay, how would I explain this to my grandmother or my nephew or niece or my next door neighbor who has no interest? They're not in this day in and day out. So that's another challenge of, again, being very concise with your messaging, but also being writing in plain language so that people understand some really tough topics. And then I think the other piece was like a memorable interaction. For me, some of the most meaningful work that I've done in my current role have been passion projects, things where you kind of pitch an idea and it comes to life. So, when I found out that the road outside of our headquarters, that it was going to be named after Hidden Figures, the person at that point who was the press secretary said, "Oh, we're just going to put out a press release on this." And I was like, "Hold on, this is a big deal in the Black community. This needs to be more than a press release." And so I pitched the idea of, we need to have an event. We need to invite, members of the family, Margot Shetterly, who wrote the book, their family members. And so that event meant so much to me, just seeing it, like being in that moment and taking a look at everyone who was there and their expressions and the gratitude that they had to take a moment to honor these women. And this is not to, put a pat or give myself a pat on the back, but just the thought that this was just going to be a press release, like that is doing a disservice to these women who went for so long not being recognized. And so those kind of interactions, they just are so heartwarming to me, of feeling like, okay, I've made an impact. Even if it's just one person, or that family now feels acknowledged after decades of not having acknowledgement, of knowing what their family members went through and being there, their daughters and their grandchildren who again saw this and saw what they're experiencing. And so those things to me are very meaningful. And, even fast forwarded to like current crew, current astronauts, I've curated events like at the Air and Space Museum, where I remember there was one young kid who literally took his sweatshirt off of his back so that Victor Glover could sign it. And he was like, "I'm keeping this." And I knew, like, he's never gonna watch that. Then it's like, again, the moment that like of his life of like, yes, this little Sharpie that clearly is gonna fade, he's gonna keep it, because seeing someone who looks like him doing big things, being selected for a mission like Artemis, is such a big deal. And so those moments are bright spots for me when I have challenging days. And sometimes what I do, I have this in my office, I have this, what do you call it? Sorry, I can't find the words. It's like
A mantra.
it's just, yes, it's like a screen that shows pictures slash, I forget what the name is called. But anyway, I keep pictures from these kind of events, so that it's like as I'm working on my computer and I'll glance and that memory will come back of like, this is why I do what I do. This is why those days when it's a lot of BS, it's like, this is why I do it, and this is why it's meaningful and it matters. Again, braving all of the challenges that I do experience.
Thank you all so much for your comments. I think that as a science communicator, I myself deal with a lot of the public, and something that I do know is that like I have to, read my audience, right? If I'm talking to K through 12, I have to bring it down to K through 12. If I'm talking to teenagers, I have to bring it to teenager. If I am talking to young adults that may not know what any of this jargon is, I have to tailor it. And so I think that's really, really important to be well informed. And also, Brittany, I do want to, it's a digital frame, it's a digital photo frame, is what Brittany was referencing. And so something that I do want to mention when it comes down to one of the most memorable things. So during the 2020 pandemic, when we first started amping up for Black In Astro, back then it was called Black in Astro Week. Brittany and her team got me in and it was like, hey, actually, we need you to do da, 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 right? And so I was doing stuff with NASA. I was an intern at the time. And that's when me and Brittany first really connected. And so, and one of the most memorable things was I was giving my NASA talk and my phone was going off, but I couldn't see it because I'm like dead into my talk. And lo and behold, everybody knows who my future ex-husband baby daddy is. That man tweeted me, and it's still on my Twitter to this day when he said, congratulations. Okay, it was Michael B. Jordan. So I was very much enthused. My heart was just like, oh my God, that's my man now. We go together real bad. In addition to that, Brittany and a few others, we had Tahara Dawkins on our panel yesterday for the space policy. Tahara, AJ, Dr. Quincy Brown, Brittany, Amber, all of them came together to help us prepare for our in-person event. And so I'm really, really grateful for all the work that they do and just making sure that we were able to stretch this out there and just keep celebrating every year. Although this year we're virtually, we will be back in person next year. Okay, so we got a few more questions and then we're going to go to the Q&A for the public Q&A. And so I'm going to put these two together. So what are the effective ways to educate the public about media literacy? And can you share with us some of your favorite aspects about the work that you do? We ended with Brittany. We're going to start with Brittany.
Okay, so I want to start with the second portion of that question, my favorite parts of the job that I have. I will say that it really is, despite the bureaucracy and so much happening in the current landscape, what I love about my job is that I have the trust and confidence of my leadership. Not everyone can say that, but for me, it has allowed me to operate with a little bit of sense. I'm going to say little bit, air quotes, a little bit of sense of autonomy, and that I have free range to bring ideas to the table, at least for consideration. And sometimes it may be like, hey, now it's not the time, or we don't have the budget, or people are open to it. So as an example, I wanted to have my own version of like a NASACon for creators, right? Like, and I had the full support of my leadership, and I was planning that, and then budget things happened, so I had to table that. The example that was mentioned before this call happened is I pitched an idea. I love music, as you can tell from my background. And I got one that Missy Elliott was going on tour, and it's called Out of This World Tour. And I just literally put a feeler out there with her team and was like, can we do something amazing? And because I had that knowledge of remembering watching music videos and seeing the Sock It To Me video and her on the set of Mars and knowing that she has had a deep love of space, and drawing those natural connections, again, authentic interest in her and her music, that I was able to pitch an idea of space visuals for her tour, of sending her song to space. So for the first time, we sent a hip hop song to space. And so what I love about my job is that while that isn't necessarily something my job expected of me, I can create spaces and opportunities to do things like that and align my true passions to my job. What was the first part of the question? Because I can go on and on about things that I love in my job and other examples of things. But again, it boils down to, again, having that autonomy, trust, and confidence, my leadership, trusting my skills and abilities. So what was the first portion? I'm sorry, Ashley.
No, you're fine. What are some effective ways to educate the public about media literacy?
Ooh, okay. So for that one, I think one of the most effective ways that I currently implement to educate people about um, that is by taking opportunities to show them the real content. So, as an example, if I see a post out there that's viral that has doctored imagery, I will intentionally share the real image so that people have that as a reference. There are so many people out there that have manipulated NASA photos, that have manipulated videos to say the moon landing never happened, or this is fake, or look at how, they really aren't floating in space. There is a microgravity, but by showing again the unedited footage, I think that that helps with that. And then one of the other pieces that I will say that I'm currently working on is a policy related to generative AI, because again, there's such a proliferation of again deep fakes and all of that, and so um, while it's not necessarily educating people on media literacy, it is a tangible step that we can take. Thinking about things like the metadata we'll use, the watermarking we'll use, and making sure that everyone in my organization, if they are a content creator, if they're communication specialists, are they publishing anything on behalf of the agency, that they know our stance is the first step is to use visuals we already have. Don't just go to AI because it's an easy way out. So I think that that ultimately helps with the media literacy, and it will help make a difference in terms of some of the things that we're seeing online, some of the narratives.
I can go next really quickly. Effective ways to educate the public about media literacy. I think this space is a great one. Like talking to journalists, talking to comms folks, talking to people who do the media, getting to know them, getting to know what they do. I guess my only other advice for that I often give folks is just read. Like read, y'all. Like actually read. Read. Reading is so fundamental, and not just like news, nonfiction. Like read fiction, read plays, read things, and learn how to critique things, because I guarantee you having that expanse of that breadth of consumption will increase your media literacy in ways that you didn't expect. And then as far as my favorite part of my work, so there's a very specific type of reader that I will once in a while hear from, and it's always the person who sends me an email and says something like, "Hey, I've never done any science or taken any science classes, and I didn't even really think that I like science, but I stumbled across your story and I just was filled with so much cosmic wonder, and I love like that you made it accessible for me." And those notes really warm my heart, because that is who I write for, right? Like I write for people like my mom, the people who are science curious, but maybe really intimidated, or who had really bad experiences growing up with science, and just, thought that they weren't any good at it or weren't able to understand it. Um, and like people like me who really struggled, which probably lit a fire under my butt to end up going into a type of science communication, because I was just determined that the problem wasn't me. The problem was that scientists don't know how to communicate. And so I was going to be that liaison for other people to enjoy the topics that I enjoyed.
I agree with everything that has been said. And I think to kind of build a little bit on what effective ways to educate the public about media literacy is also, helping them understand what we do, what journalists do, the difference between PR and journalism, the different types of journalism. I think right now, a lot of what we're seeing is people thinking that us journalists, we work for a particular political party or a particular person. And that is not what we do. Even though you have a lot of news organizations that lean a certain different direction. So I would just say, just making sure that they are aware and understanding that. And again, reading. In terms of the aspects of what I love about the work that I do, I love being able to inform. I love being able to be curious and asking questions and being able to kind of bring down to people what I've learned from somebody that they may not have an opportunity to talk to be able to inform and write nuances of that, not just believing what they say, but also adding the context to that, holding them accountable to that, and then also informing. And I think what I love about covering space and science in particular is that I get to expand on my curiosity, the curiosities that I've had, since I was young. And, it's made me think about the types of science and astronomy that I like to cover. I love me a black hole. I just think it is the most fascinating thing in the world. There's this favorite YouTube video of mine that I have that gave the reenactment of a black hole based off of one of the movies of like, well, this is what it really would have looked like if they had really did this of Interstellar, right? And they did a real scientific explanation of all the things that happened and what that would have really looked like today. And it is one of my most favorite things to watch. Anyway, so I think being able to explore that curiosity and be able to inform and write around that, I love being able to do that. And again, if that inspires someone, a young person or a young aspiring journalist to be able to get interested in that, then that's also a part of me doing my job. And if it challenges people to think about something that they haven't thought about, then that also tells me that I did my job. And also, if it makes a lawmaker angry, then I probably also did my job. So, I love being able, so to sum all that up, I love to explore the curiosity of it, inform through my curiosity, and also to be able to be trusted to break down something that's complex so people can understand it too.
Thank you all so very much. I believe you all answered this question already. This is actually our final question, um, which is, what advice would you all have for those who want to become communication specialists and journalists, and where can people find you at?
I think it's my turn to go first, maybe. So I'll reiterate what I mentioned at the top about not being pigeonholed into your any particular field. Again, for me, that happened because I was the youngest person in the office, and it's like, hey, you go do social media. So please, please, please avoid that. Being nimble is so important in your career as platforms change, as the way that audiences consume information changes. I think in this day and age, being very fluent in digital is important, so if you are a writer, right, like having that long form piece of content, but also figuring out, all right, if I want to share this on TikTok, how will I do that in a way that, will reel people in and hook them and then maybe drive them to read the longer piece that they want to. So that fluency and being able to navigate multiple platforms, I think is really important. And then where you can find me online, I will say I'll do most of my professional networking on LinkedIn. So you can look me up there.
Yeah, I think that, that was a very, very good point. If you, again, as I've said, if you really want to be a journalist, don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed into something. Or, if you want to cover a specific beat like politics, if you like Congress, if you want to cover, space, that is your, that there's nothing wrong with that. But to be open and to understand that, the things that you're seeing on TikTok, people who are calling themselves news influencers, like if you're doing it to be popular, keep in mind that you're not always going to be popular. It's not going to do that. And it's a lot of work. And don't do it just because you want to make money, because there's a lot of journalists, you don't make a lot of money, right? You work for major news organizations, you have, a little bread, but even now we're seeing some of the, budgets and things, dwindle because of that. But, if you want to be a journalist, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Love what you're doing. Think about, why do you want to do this? What is it that you love about it? And to understand that this ain't gonna be no 9 to 5. If that's what you are expecting, you want something that's an easy, steady 9 to 5, it's just not gonna be that way. You never know what's gonna happen, from one day to the next, or even in that moment, even though there are some beats that are more steady than others. And also be curious. Make sure that you're curious about whatever it is that you want to cover. And lastly, I'll just say be kind. Be kind always, and be humble and grounded, and stand firm in what you believe, because you can't expect people to talk to you and you're nasty. Like, nobody has to talk to you or say anything, and that's not going to get people to trust you by being nasty. And that's my TED talk for the day, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, all great points. I guess I would just add figuring out the type of communication that you want to do, because I sort of hinted at this earlier, like, uh media communications, public relations, SciComm, what people generally think of SciComm in terms of like YouTube or like TikTok, things like that, and science journalism. All of these things are different, and they all have different approaches. They all require a different skill set, and they all have different audiences. And then I guess just like, once you know what you want to do, find someone who's doing it and see how to emulate that.
Where can people find you?
Oh, I try to be very offline these days. Professionally, I have a Blue Sky account where I post gift links to all of my stories, just because, I try to be democratic. Not everyone can afford a New York Times subscription. That's at Katrina Miller, PhD. It really is just a digest of things that I've written or am reading, and then I also cross post those to LinkedIn.
My bad. I'm sorry. I didn't say where people can find me. You can find me. I'm pretty much all over social. You can find me on LinkedIn, to professionally connect with me. You connect with me on LinkedIn. You can just type in my name, Shondalise Duster, and send a connection or a message.
Thank you all so very much for being with us. My co-host, apparently it's her nap time, so she took her nap. Precious is gone for the day. But we do have some questions. So we're going to start off with the questions from Cherie Greer. So excited to see you on this panel, Dr. Miller. Can you share a surprising intersection that you've discovered in your science journalism? And others, feel free to answer as well.
Oh yeah, I feel like I kind of already answered this. I talked about the story I did on indigenous eclipse practices, the story I did on Palestinian scientists. I just really like to, especially since I work for a general paper now, I try to look outside of the study story, like staying so tied to like what new studies are coming out in the big scientific journals, and instead of just try to look at the world around me and see where I can find a scientific angle to spin it on.
Anyone else? Okay. Another one from Cherie. You all seem to be moving from the realm, from the science realm into broadening your brilliance into writing. Do any of you have advice or tips for people like me doing the opposite? I started from a solid writing background and moving into incorporating more science into their writing.
I can also start with that. So this is funny because, like I said, Cherie is literally one of my favorite writers, and I actually took a class with her, and she's like the first person who actually really affirmed that I could call myself a writer. Like, I left that class feeling like, okay, I am a writer, like a real writer. But I get this question a lot about like science writing, how to get into science writing. And my opinion, I think this varies, but my opinion is that it is actually, I think that there are, okay, I see that there's value in going from either direction, but I think that it is not impossible and actually more beneficial in some ways to maneuver from writing into science than science into writing, because writing is an actual skill, and a lot of scientists cannot write. A lot of scientists cannot communicate. And a lot of what I do, again, is less so about using my own expertise that I've developed during my PhD to inform the public, as it is like relaying the expertise of others. And so that means that the real skill is just talking to people. How do you interview someone to get the information that you need, but in a digestible way so that it's easy to translate to the public so that you don't have to do it yourself? And so if I were coming from a writing background and wanted to incorporate more science into my writing practice, I would just start talking to scientists. I would just like you research any other writing topic, whether you're writing a novel, a personal essay, whatever, like I would just go talk to scientists, science communicators, especially because they know how to, like translate the jargon into something that's accessible.
Anyone else want to go? No? Okay, so we have another question from my cousin, my cousin-in-law, Octavia Nettles, which Brittany answered already, but we can still open it up to the floor. How do you navigate the balance between giving it your all, but not wanting someone else to take credit for your work? From an early career science communicator that didn't know this would be her path.
I will say, that's a very, very good question. I think that is something that journalists, we have to think about as well. Especially because I think there's always kind of like, if I'm out somewhere, if I'm asking a question, or if I know I have maybe a scoop on something, I don't want nobody else to take that. And so it's like, if I'm trying to, get more informed opinions about this, can I trust that my source isn't going to also tell it to another reporter on another beat who they also talk to? And not being disingenuous with it, but and then it's like, yeah, this is like something I reported first, but then it's like, again, it still is mine, and I know that people are going to take it. But I will say, in terms of giving it my all, that's something that, I know for me as a journalist, I'm not going to put out something that I haven't given my 1000% to. And I think that I've had to learn throughout my career that I can give it my all, but I don't have to literally deplete myself by doing it. Does that make sense? Um, I hope that makes sense. So, and what I found was depleting me was that I was giving and pouring so much into it that I wasn't thinking about what else. That's weird. It just asked me to confirm my speaking language. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about what what really was it that I need to report? Because again, I over report. I have so much reporting and things, and I go down the rabbit hole and I go in too deep. And that is something that I had to start pulling myself back from. And I have to stop myself from going that far. So for me, I have an awareness of when I've reached that point. And I have to tell myself, you can't go that deep into that. And then getting so emotionally wrapped up into it, I can't do that. And so that's just kind of how I look at it. And I would just say, know what you're given, but don't completely pour out your entire self. And if you feel like it's something that you really want to put your heart and soul into, be very discerning as to what that is and what that is not, because some things don't deserve you to pour out everything. Does that make sense? I hope that's making sense what I'm saying, or what I'm trying to say. Um, because I'm a perfectionist. And sometimes things just aren't going to be perfect. And it's okay if I miss it or if I get it wrong. But I think sometimes us pouring out and giving it our all, it kind of counteracts against what it actually is that we're trying to do and what we're trying to get across.
Yeah, and I'm happy to add on to what I put. I answered it really short in my response. I said, I think being visible and vocal is key as it relates to, people taking credit for your work. But what I mean by that is identifying those opportunities so that your name is always attached to your work. So that may look like, hey, you're the one who's presenting it. you're sending the initial email with the pitch and the idea, so your name is attached to it. Making sure you're saying I instead of we. All those kind of things will help paint a picture that you are leading this effort, even if it is a group project. But again, I think it's important for you to play an active role in making sure that you get the credit for your work. And as soon as you see and you clock that somebody's trying to, swerve in your lane and take credit for it, you finding a very tactful way to make it clear and correct the record that like this is my work, so that they aren't taking credit for your work. That's one of my biggest pet peeves for me. I always, in all my meetings, people will tell you I'm always giving shout outs, names, this person worked this, that person worked that. So this is something that's really important to me. It just pisses me off, I'm being real honest, when people take credit for other people's work of like using we, painting like and over inflating their role in something. And so if you're visible and you're vocal about your work, I think that that will help mitigate that, because you'll be known as someone who represents their work well. So like over time in my organization, I have become known as one of the probably only leaders who gives credit in meetings to my team. Instead of saying my team, I will say Stephanie did this, Nikki did this, Andres did this. And I think over time, if you again are visible and vocal, that your work will shine through and people will associate it with your name and not other people's names.
Thank you all so much for answering those questions. So unfortunately, Katrina had to drop because she had another meeting. So we're gonna quickly wrap up because we know people have things to do and we're a little bit over time. I think we have 2 questions, but if someone wants to type the answer or quickly answer them, I think that'll be great.
Yes,
Yeah, I see.
that now. Go ahead. Sorry.
I see a question in here about taking jargon and making it understandable to the public. What advice would you give to researchers to help make their research more accessible and read from the get-go? I would say as a journalist, as they say all the time, explain it like I'm 5. That's a question that I'm always asking when I'm reading studies or if I'm talking to researchers. And, especially when it comes to like dark energy and stuff like that, I'm asking questions. Okay, you're talking about dark energy. Is there a difference between dark matter and dark matter and dark energy? If so, what is it? Explain it to me like I am literally a 5-year-old, and that's not to be, trying to diminish somebody's intelligence, but you know more about what it is that you're studying than we do. And you've been in this field for a long time. So I would just say, explain it, just straight up, just as if you're talking to somebody who has never, ever learned anything about what it is, and just breaking it down, including, the differences between, certain, astronomical or scientific terms.
So thank you all so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate everything that you all do and everything that you all put into this community. So today is Sharing the Universe. So please check our socials of seeing Sharing the Universe and how we over at Black In Astro prioritize people like Brittany, Chandelice, and Katrina. Next is our next day, which we do have our next day, which is a scavenger hunt tomorrow, which is Juneteenth. So that's a rest day. We believe in rest days over here. So we do have a scavenger hunt where we have prizes, and then Friday is Reading the Universe, where we'll talk about panelists about their storytelling. So it's the Black in Storytelling panel, which is moderated by Dr. Moya McTeer, who is an astrophysicist, a folklorist, and a host. So she has a podcast, she has a TV show on PBS Digital. So please come and check it out. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you.